This is Krista. Welcome back to MadeToBeWhole. Stay tuned for this week's discussion of my most asked question: how long will it take for me to get better?
MadeToBeWhole is intended for informational purposes only. It's not intended to replace the advice or care of a licensed healthcare professional. Participating in this podcast does not constitute a provider-patient relationship with Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, or any of the guests featured on MadeToBeWhole. Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, and any featured guests aren't responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from use of information obtained in this podcast or associated materials. Please consult a healthcare professional for any health-related concerns that you are experiencing.
Welcome back to the podcast. I want to talk today about the question we frequently get about prognosis, which is a great question. I think it's completely fair to say, hey, I have this illness that has disrupted my life. What's my timeline? What's my trajectory? That's how it works in most of medicine, which is, you have a broken bone. Maybe you have to get surgery to have it set. You have physical therapy, but you get a timeline from your providers. Okay, it's going to take X amount of time to recover from surgery. You're going to be in physical therapy for this long. You can expect in this amount of time that you're going to be fully or maximally recovered. What I've discovered, however, as I've kind of analyzed why it's difficult to apply that prognostic model to a lot of what I do with chronic illness, is that our healthcare system really is based on the acute model, where you take one big thing that's happening that's usually sudden onset, or you can discern when it started, and what you're trying to do is end that event or the sequelae of that event. And I would say our healthcare system's fairly decent at that. I mean, once somebody's septic, there's a much more straightforward path for what needs to be done, what to prioritize, etc. If you've got some sort of disruption in bodily integrity via a tumor or a fracture or some other sort of injury, there are at least some mechanical predictions that we can know. But what's really, really difficult in the world of vector-borne infections and some of these other complex chronic presentations is the number of variables. We talked recently about data and analyzing data and how we can evaluate studies to determine if something's good research, what to draw from it. One of the things that is really, really difficult when you try to take what we learn from research and have this set of sort of absolute truths that we apply to, say, everybody with Lyme disease or Parkinson's, is that there are so many other things that contribute to that presentation. So if you think about it in terms of other things we know, outcomes don't depend just on ingredients. They depend on ingredients plus conditions. So if you take cooking, you need quality ingredients, and you need the right ingredients and the right amount of them to make good chocolate chip cookies. I love chocolate chip cookies. However, it doesn't matter if you have the right ingredients if you don't have things to mix them in. If your oven is broken, there's so many other things that could make that go wrong. The skill of the person making the cookies. Maybe it's somebody who's never baked before. They just throw everything in one, stir it a few times. They don't know, you're supposed to cream the butter first and add the eggs and the sugar and the vanilla. So many things other than the right ingredients can impact the outcome. It's the same for a fire. So you can take a lit match and drop it, but whether or not it causes damage depends partly on where it's dropped. If you drop it in a swimming pool, that match is completely benign. It's not going to do a thing other than make your pool dirty. But if you drop it on concrete, probably also not an issue unless maybe there's some dead foliage around there. If you have an accelerant like gasoline, kerosene, something like that, a small spark can cause tremendous damage that's really, really difficult to slow down. If you think of forest fires, how that can take days and weeks and months because a small antecedent caused something really, really dramatic, and we can't just go back to the source and dump water on that campfire that wasn't put out or that cigarette and stop everything that was incited. And that, in my experience, is largely what drives somebody's trajectory as far as the symptoms they develop because of an illness or condition, the downstream effects of it, and then how long it takes to get better. So we talk about infection in the context of these vector-borne infections that I do a lot with. Straight up, I've mentioned this before, there are people who have Lyme, Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, all these other things who don't know they have it. Some of them are sick. Some of them don't really have symptoms. They may have had it or been exposed, but it didn't really do anything to them. Is it because Lyme is not a bad thing? No, not at all. But their body didn't have the conditions for that match to ignite this fire, or at least not right away. Sometimes we see those downstream effects. So what are the sorts of things that can make a person much, much more vulnerable to prolonged symptoms that need addressed in order to facilitate healing? So I will tell you some of the comments I've had from patients recently. We've talked on the podcast, and those are my patients know about the changes we're doing with foundations and with our membership programs, despite what some people believe they really, really are designed to get you better faster and to save you time and money. That is honestly the intent of my heart. I know not everyone believes that, but that's okay. But interestingly, I've had multiple patients say to me, I wish we would have done that at the beginning with me. I could have saved 2 years if I would have checked for mold. And it goes two ways. In some situations, I probably should have offered it sooner, but didn't. But then I have other people who say, yeah, I remember you bringing that up, but it was just one more test and one more expense, and I didn't do it. And look at all the time I've wasted. Same thing with nutrient deficiencies. These things that create the conditions for that forest fire to start, we have to modify the conditions in order to prevent bad things from happening. But also, even once bad things have happened, we have to create conditions for healing. And that is the whole purpose of the integrative functional approach and of what we're doing at HP with our memberships, with our foundations program. We're trying to have the best framework to create conditions for healing. Now, whether or not those conditions bear fruit is dependent on a lot of different things. Obviously, we have to do our part. You also, as a patient, have to do yours. I was listening to something this morning on BYU radio. I went to Brigham Young University, and they made a quote, or somebody quoted BYU's mission statement. And I went and looked it up because I thought, oh, this is really, really good. This really has an impact on what I do with my patients and how I try to live life. And I want to look at that framework. So one of the things they say is that everything they do at BYU, instruction, programs, and services, including extracurricular experiences, should make their own contribution toward the balanced development of the total person. So the balanced development of the total person. Such a broadly prepared individual will not only be capable of meeting personal challenge and change, but will also bring strength to others in the tasks of home and family life, social relationships, civic duty, and service to mankind. So what is balanced development, or the balanced development of the total person, and how does that contribute to your healing trajectory? The way I view that in terms of healing and how long it takes someone to get better is that we have to be balanced in a couple of different domains. First of all, I do think there's such a thing as personal balance in life. I think that people will heal better if they are not neglecting spheres of who they are. So, we are physical beings, we are spiritual beings, we are intellectual beings, we're a lot of different things. And of course, there are times in our lives that one of those elements will take more time than others, but you can't just ignore it. You can't just say, this is a stressful time in life. I really need to focus on my mental health. I don't really have time for my physical health. Not going to work. They're interrelated. You can't separate them. You can't say, I'm just going to do everything physically I can to be strong and healthy, and my past doesn't matter. It's not going to matter that I had an abusive childhood or was in a really difficult relationship or was assaulted by someone. it actually matters. And is exercise a great coping skill? Does eating healthy help? Sure, all of those things are really important, but you are more than just that body. And even within your body are the memories of those things that happen. They impacted development. They affect cellular function. You may be stuck in fight or flight or that cell danger response. You cannot say, this is not a good time in my life to take care of my relationships or my spirituality. I'll do that later when things calm down. Not an option. Now, does it mean that you'll always have the same amount of time to give all those things or as much time as you would like? No, of course, we have to make individual adjustments, but you have to deal with all of those fears in your life in order to heal. It reminded me a little bit of yoga in that the people who are the most flexible are the ones who are also the most grounded. So you can't do crazy poses and stretches and everything in yoga unless your foundation is really, really solid. You have to have a strong foundation. And from that, you can do all sorts of things. The other thing, if you look at yoga, is that most people are not born naturally flexible. There are a few people who are. Some of them, it's because they have a connective tissue disorder. But that aside, some people are not naturally flexible and then therefore limit themselves saying, I could never do that. Yoga's not for me. I'm not flexible. It's absolutely for you, and it could make big impacts in your health. You have to work on a foundation and consistent practice so that you can make these small gains that aggregate into something much, much bigger and better. And if you look at that journey, I think where people limit themselves, and we can use this as an analogy for other healing, is their view of what it would mean to be successful at yoga would mean something that would make a good Instagram post or that they could tell someone about versus I will have improved physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Working on breathing helps me deal with stress. Working on core strength prevents fall and injury. You can be totally successful, wildly successful as an amateur yogi without having a single Instagram-worthy post or outfit in your life. We, as a society, are much more vulnerable to creating expectations for ourselves and for happiness that aren't based on reality. It's based on what we think our life should look like. I think about it quite a bit as far as housing goes. I may have mentioned this before, but I refer to HGTV as house porn because it's like making you dissatisfied with your home one episode at a time. Now, granted, there's some people who can watch it and they are truly inspired and they love it and they love fixing things. And it's just a great educational resource. But for some people, what it's done is create this, well, this is what it means to have a welcoming home. This is what it means to have a nice home. And they're constantly comparing and they're not happy with the abundance that they have because it wouldn't pop out on an episode of the Property Brothers or whatever it is that people watch. We can do the same thing with our health. We can create a view of health, healing, and wholeness that is not really compatible with reality. It is not realistic to have the goal of never having pain, suffering, or fatigue because you are human, okay? It's just absolutely not an option. And so when you are looking at healing, I would recommend a couple of different things. Define for yourself what your goals are. What do you want to be able to do in a year that you can't do now? And then watch your progress. Set goals that help you get there and then look back. Don't get frustrated if today wasn't easier than yesterday. Start measuring things by months and even by years. Nobody wants to hear the word years, but I'm telling you, for people who are chronically ill and have been for a while, that rebuilding is going to take a while. I'll give you an example. My son Daniel, who's been sick for a long time and has had a lot of physical weakness and pain because of it, he was able to help someone move a few weeks ago. And so he went after work, he helped them move. He came home, he was exhausted, he was in total pain. He went straight to bed. I was so thrilled though, and I went and told him, I said, Daniel, you have to think about how amazing this is because, yes, it caused you a lot of fatigue, a lot of pain. You had to recover, but you were able to do that. And 1 year ago, you would not have been able to do that. You would have physically not been able to do what you did. You felt as bad as you did afterwards before. That is progress. Do we want to get to the point where he can do those things without having a lot of pain and fatigue? Yeah, that's going to be fantastic. We look forward to that day, but it's still progress. Another thing when you're measuring healing to keep in mind is to say, I have to keep track of all of my changes, positive and negative, and not hyper focus on one thing. Very frequently, I'll ask someone an appointment, has anything changed? Is anything better? They're like, nope, nothing's changed, or it's all worse. And then I go through their symptoms. How are the headaches? Well, now that you mention them, I don't get those anymore. How's the twitching? That hasn't happened in a few months. How are your palpitations? Oh, they used to keep me up all night, but now I don't even remember the last time I had that. And so there are a lot of things that are by their own report better, but we stay so focused on the things that are wrong that we miss the gains. And if you're only focused on the things that are wrong, you are never going to be well because you're missing the big picture. Personally, I could say a couple of different things that would be factually true but seem incongruent about my life. So, on one hand, I could say, I feel better than I ever have. My life is amazing, and I am doing so much better with Babesia and Bartonella treatment. And that would be true because cognitively things are better than they were. Disabling anxiety that I had for years is gone. I used to have these knots down the right side of my spine and under my shoulder blade that would keep me up at night. They were just horrible. I had insomnia for decades that I was always fighting. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't read books. Like all of those things are 100% improved. On the other hand, you could say, and it would also be factually correct, I'm doing worse than I have ever been doing. I spend thousands of dollars a month on my family's health. I have severe pain. I have to come home at night after work, and sometimes I'm in bed from 7 on. My legs throb. I have pulsating above my left ear that radiates down the left side of my body, and I feel like my left eye is being squeezed. I could go on, but there's just some things that are quite uncomfortable right now that were not there before, and they are worse. So how do I balance those two truths? I have to acknowledge them both. I have to acknowledge that both things are true, and then I have to find a way to frame what is happening. So one of the things that I do that is sometimes helpful, I remember one time laying on the massage table, I was getting a massage, and these left-sided symptoms were just horrible. They've been just really, really, really uncomfortable intermittently lately. But I said to myself, you used to have this on the right side of your body, and now it's gone. What you're feeling is healing. Healing is painful. Your body is healing. What you're doing is still working. You were sick for decades. It's going to take a long time to get better. Healing hurts. You're on the right track. Just reframing it. I think also having the perspective that unfortunately there are no shortcuts to gaining experience it's time that's told me that. It's difficult at the beginning of a journey to say, hey, it's okay if things take a while. It's no big deal. No, it's hard. It's hard. And time is really, really, really difficult. But with age, we've lived through hard things before and we've gotten through. And with your health, if you've made it through other hard things or you've made it through herxing before, it's not interminable. It ends. There are no shortcuts to healing. I have not found a way for somebody who has a chronic vector-borne infection to get sick and avoid herxing. I haven't found a way to do that. I haven't found a way to make it free or even cheap. I haven't found a way to make it super, super fast because for most people, we have all of these complicating factors. Most people, by the time they come to me, they are not the swimming pool that's had a match dropped onto it. They are the forest with the dry leaves, or they are the match that was dropped into a puddle of accelerant somewhere that just took off and exploded. And this is part of what makes research limiting. So when they do studies on Lyme disease or Babesia or any other condition, they try to control for as many variables as they can. That's what happens in research. So they say, okay, all of these people had Lyme disease. Let's control for the fact that some of them maybe were also smokers. We'll take that out. Let's control for socioeconomic status or pre-existing diabetes. There are a few things they try to control for. The problem is there's no study that is robust enough to control for all the individual variants. What you end up with is this, it's called polyetiology. So poly is that prefix, P-O-L-Y, that means many or several, and etiology is cause. So you have polyetiology, and you have to figure what are all of those contributing causes. Is the infection one of the contributing causes? Absolutely. But it's not the only one. So we have to figure out for you, is it pretty straightforward? You had a healthy immune system, genes are stacked in your favor, you don't have any toxic exposures, you don't have nutrient deficiencies, you don't have any vulnerabilities that are really going to be exposed. Somebody in that condition, a couple months, and they can actually be up and going. I don't see that a lot because by the time people make it to me, it's been a while, and I specialize in taking care of zebras, I would say. And let me explain what that means. In medicine, in everybody's training, they say, hey, when you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras. The most common thing happens the most commonly. So if somebody comes in and tells you they have chest pain, it's either got to be acid reflux or their heart. These are the most common things that happen. If somebody tells you they have palpitations, blame it on anxiety if their EKG's normal. There are a million different things, but this whole idea that basically we're all horses, we're not in Africa, there just aren't that many zebras out there. In my world, I take care of a lot of zebras. I don't know what I have. Special colony of zebras here in North America, or maybe it's just an exotic a breed of horses that requires special care. I don't know what it is, but it's different. And so the usual things do not apply. It's not just a matter of I give you the right thing to treat acid reflux and it goes away, because maybe your acid reflux is being driven by something much bigger, like an infection that causes inflammation, like toxic exposure, like a nutrient deficiency. There's so many different things that can drive that. And if you treat a symptom and then a treatment lasts only temporarily, then you've missed the underlying cause. The goal isn't to just keep looking and looking for a treatment that alleviates the symptom, even though we want those things in the interim because we want people to be comfortable. The goal is to find out, where is this coming from? Why is this so persistent? And then I would encourage you on the patient end to be patient with yourself, to be patient with your providers, to be patient with the process, to be patient with the fact that if we can't give you hard and fast protocols and predicted outcomes because there's so many things that are beyond our control. One of the things is genetics, which we've talked a lot about on this podcast. And I came up with a little analogy that might help you understand a little more about genetics and why you could have 2 people or 3 people with the same parents who grew up in the same house, so the same physical, social, emotional environment, same exposures, but have very, very different health outcomes. So for every gene, there's 2 pairs, like 2 copies. And so each parent for each gene, it's like they're a coin and there's heads and tails. And so one parent, if they have 1 copy of a gene, it's like they've got a coin with heads and tails. Another parent might have a coin that has 2 tails on it. So every time a child is born, 2 coins were flipped, and what combination did they end up with? You could have one person in that family who has a head and a tail, and then you could have someone else who has 2 tails. If you have 2 parents that have heads and tails, you've got 3 different possible combinations: heads and heads, tails and tails, or heads and tails. So if that helps you a little bit understand why you can have people who are related and have such variety. And remember, there are so many genes that make up all of us. So it's not just one gene, it's this combination of variants. And really, truly, you are uniquely you. Except identical twins, nobody's genes are an exact match. I love, big heart, the Intellix DNA testing because it helps me figure out why some people are responding the way they are to environmental things. I strongly believe that I know it's a big investment, but that it's worth every penny because it takes so much guesswork out of it and helps me understand. I've mentioned before, it looks at inflammatory pathways. There's some people who we read the report and genetically it tells us, hey, if they get an infection or injury, inflammation starts and their body can't turn it off. They have runaway inflammation. So yes, it's absolutely possible that two people could have very, very different physical responses. So, how long does it take to heal? It depends. And I would suggest that you start with the things you can control and healing your mindset and your expectations too. At the plasmapheresis conference I was at, they talked a lot about managing expectations with patients. And I think that really applies. I see a lot of people who get caught up in this desperation because everything's not better yet. And I do get that. That is a worthy goal, but it's not always a realistic goal, and things take time. And as we start, if we're peeling the layers of the onion, sometimes you think, oh, there's so much to this, and you start opening up and it wasn't really that big of a deal. And some people, it's just more layers and more layers and more layers, and it's much more complex than we anticipated. And so we have never claimed to have all of the answers, but one thing I do pride myself in is that we keep looking. We start with the things that have helped the most people in our experience. We start with that. But if that doesn't work for you, don't be angry and say, well, why didn't you offer this other rare thing at the beginning? It's because not everybody needs it. And unless somebody tells me straight up, money is no object, Warder, any test that you think is necessary, I try to be responsible with your resources and start with the things I think are going to be the most helpful. If you've already done a lot, I might recommend jumping to some more extensive things, but you have to be willing to go on this journey with some uncertainty, but with hope, the hope that you really were made to be whole. Another concept that I thought was really interesting, we talked about polyetiology. So if we take that prefix again, poly, there is this thing called polyvariant analysis. And I do not pretend to be like a computer guru, statistician genius, but if you look up polyvariate analysis, they talk about analyzing data, and when they do, it's not just looking at it once, it's at it again and again and again in different contexts so that you can get a more precise understanding of how that particular thing is going to behave. And that's how your lab work and your treatment plan evolves too. So we do these great labs at the beginning. All right, we're going to look at your micronutrients. We're going to look for mold and other toxin exposure. We are going to look at your hormones. And we are going to start by taking a big look at everything and say, okay, which things are most likely? What's helped the most people? What lines up with this person's symptoms, lengths of symptoms, severity of symptoms, that sort of thing. And we start those interventions. And sometimes we do the right things at the beginning. Sometimes, though, we get a partial response, and then we go back, we look at the same data, and we say, okay, this is what helped, this is what didn't help. Gosh, maybe this thing that should have helped made it worse. Let's look at this data again in light of the new information we're gathering. And so we can keep reassessing the same data in different contexts to helping us narrow down what's really going on and what's getting in the way of healing. I think also as far as perspective, and part of this just comes with time, but if you look at all the things that your health is requiring of you for it to be robust. So again, I could say, can you believe how many hours in my day I spend doing all these things just to function? Like, I've been up since whatever time in the morning. I've already done the sauna, the foot bath, gone on a walk, or done yoga. I went to bed really, really early last night. I mean, I could just really, really drill on, can you believe I have to take all these supplements? Can you believe I have to take this stuff for pain and inflammation? Or I could step back and say, that's all a lot, but how grateful am I that I found tools that can help me? What sounds much, much more devastating to me personally is to have all the things going on, but then when I get up in the morning and I'm really stiff and in pain, that I didn't have my sauna to go sit in, that I didn't have my inflammatory stuff by my bed, that I couldn't sit and do the foot bath and have my neck and back feel better and my head feel better. Focusing on the good stuff. One of the things that I give thanks for a lot is my bed. I love my bed. I love my heating pad. I could be discouraged and say, this is awful that I spend so much time in my bed. I'm so grateful that I have a comfortable bed and that my heating pad makes me feel better and that I have people I love who surround me. So your healing is a personalized path. A lot of what impacts the outcomes are things beyond your control, but there are things within your control. I absolutely promise that there are. You have to be pensive. You have to ponder things. If prayer is part of your life, I encourage prayer for expressing gratitude and seeking direction as you're trying to make decisions about which things will work for which people. Don't be afraid to bring up other options with your provider, but be kind. If they didn't bring it up before, it's not because they weren't trying to help you get better. It's because they were looking at it from a different lens, and we need that kind of joined perspective. Make sure you plan, keep records, and personalize. Stop searching online. Stop asking ChatGPT or Claude for like the perfect Lyme treatment protocol, because it's not taking into account you. You are an individual. You have individual circumstances, finances, environment, genes, nutrient status, medical history. It's not taking into account all of those things. It's polyetiology, and we have to do the polyvariate analysis. And it's nuanced and it takes time. But remember, you can be healed before you're cured. You can have peace of mind. You can learn to be comfortable in your body and to feel joy in your journey, even when all your symptoms are not gone. There's a lot of great stuff that's been written about this, and I would encourage you to have those layers of goals. What can I do to find joy in my journey now? In my difficult journey, it doesn't mean you Pollyanna and pretend that things are perfect, but there are good things happening, and there are things that are within your control. Find ways to do that, and find ways to balance the selfishness that treatment requires with avoiding being self-centered. I think this is so key. You have to be selfish in that, yes, you have to pay attention to your health. You need to make good decisions. You need to prioritize you, but you let go of that. Look to others, look to them for help, and look for ways to be a helper. No matter what condition you are in, you can be a light and blessing to others. And I promise that will make your burdens lighter and your journey better. And think of this as embarking on a path to whole health for your whole life. And your symptoms, it's like coming down the mountain. You're not going to just jump off the cliff. That would kill you. You're going to go down the windy path that got you up there. You've got to go down it in reverse, but you can get to the bottom and you can be made whole. So remember to have hope, to never give up, manage expectations, keep looking for answers, and don't be afraid to reach out if there's anything we can do to help you on your journey. Remember to have hope, because you were made to be whole.
Have a podcast question or suggestion? Text or call us on the podcast info line at 330-439-0686. Thank you for spending time with me today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to be notified when new episodes release. And remember, you were made to be whole.